Hello guys, welcome back. This is your first video looking at the security aspect of a router. We're going to be taking a look at how to secure the router console access in this particular video. We're going to be taking a look at four main things in this particular video. First of all, the console password. How do you secure the console connecting into the console by using a password on the console port? Then we'll take it one step further. Rather than just doing a common console password, we can also have the ability to uniquely identify different administrators for the device, the router, by creating a local database of users and passwords. So when the user logs in, rather than using a common password where everybody is using the same password to log in, I'm going to create separate users and passwords, corresponding passwords for them. Once that part is done, we'll take a look at once a user logs into the console port, how does he proceed to the privilege exec mode by creating a password for issuing the enable command. We'll also be taking a look at some other console commands that I do generally as soon as I bring my router up. So let's go ahead and dive into it. Again, my lab is based on, I'm still working on the same topology, same lab, same setup, where router 1 and router 2 have a WAN connection to each other over the serial link. It is connected through the console to the management PC. So let's go ahead and take a look at the lab based on that. The first thing that we'll be taking a look at over here is the console password. So we'll take a look at the console password, what it does, and enable it. So what is the console password? If you guys remember, let me go back onto my router. I go to router 1 right now. I'm connected through the console over here. As soon as I press enter, those two banners that I had configured prior in the prior video, prior lab pop up over here. Let me bring up my magic pen. So over here, if you take a look at the two banners over here, the first one over here that pops up is called the message of the day banner. The second one was your the other banner, configure all, please log all the configuration changes to the change log when done. This is your exec banner. In that particular video, when we were configuring it, I also talked about the login banner that will pop up this time around. I'll configure a login banner as well. That pops in between the MOTD and the exec banner. Exec banner is after the user logs in. The login banner and the MOTD message of the day is prior to the login. So first thing I want to do is I want to configure a console password. So rather than allowing anybody connecting into your router, what I want to do is I want to put a password and the user needs to enter that password before he gets in. How do I go about doing it? Very simple to do that. You need to go into the console line and configure some console line parameters to set the password up. Very simple to do, as I said. You go into the privilege exec mode, and from there I'm going to jump into the global configuration mode. In the global configuration mode, because I want to configure my console port settings, because I want to control who connects in through the console port, I'll go into line console 0. Again, you could abbreviate and say line con 0, but the full command is console 0. There's only one console line, so that's the console port that we're talking about. Over here, if I want to protect logging into the console by using a password, the command for that is password followed by the password. In my lab over here, what I want you guys to do for the console password is I want to use the password Cisco123 as a password and enable the login authentication. So how do I go about doing that? Password and the password. Now, when I put the password in, it is case sensitive. Make sure you don't put an extra space over here because the space is counted as part of the password. So make sure your cursor is at the end of the 3 over here, or whatever the last character is. Press enter. And once you're in there, I need to enable the login authentication by typing in login. So once I'm done, end would take me directly into the privilege exec mode, and to test it, I'll do the exit command. When I exit, prior to this, before configuring the console password, when I pressed enter, it automatically logged me in. Now what's going to happen when I press enter, it's going to prompt me for the password, but after it has displayed what? That message of the day command that I had. We can also verify that message by checking my running config. We'll take a look at that after I get in. So what's the password over here? If I type in Cisco, I'm going to type in Cisco in lowercase 123. It's going to prompt the password back in because I typed it in the wrong case. Cisco, the way I had typed it in when I was configuring it, was C capital ISCO123, enter. And as soon as I do that, because I enabled or got into the exec mode, it'll prompt me with the exec banner. Please log all the configuration changes to the change log when you're done. Thank you. So that's how you control your authentication, the base level authentication for your console port. Now, the problem with this is if I have 5 users or 10 users logging in, all of them will be logging in using the same password. All right, so if I want to go back and check who's done a particular configuration, whether it's a good configuration, give them credit for it, or maybe reprimand them for doing a wrong configuration, I don't know who did it because all of them are logging in using the same password, the common password. Everyone that's logging into the console port will be logging in with this password, Cisco123. So to get around that, I have the ability to create a local accounts database in which I will be creating a username and a corresponding password. Later on, we'll also take a look at how to do remote authentication rather than creating the database on the local router. But at this point, that's all I want you guys to concentrate on, is how to create that local database so that I can do my authentication based on a username password rather than just a password. So to do that, again, configuration has to be done in global config. In order to get into global config, en to get to privilege exec, config T to get into global config, and that's where I create my local accounts database. How do I create my local accounts database? The command is username. It's not case sensitive. The name of the command or the command itself is not case sensitive, but I just typed in username uppercase, but doesn't matter. I could have typed it in like that as well. It's okay. After the username, the password, the username that I want to create. Let's take a look at the lab and do it based on the lab. So the console configuration based on the normal password is done. And this is where I talked about the limitation of using a common password. I will not be able to identify the administrator uniquely. So in order to get around that, I'll create a local accounts database. And that's what I'm doing over here. And based on the lab, they want you to create a username called admin1 over here with a password of Cisco111. So when admin1 logs in, his password is Cisco111. And I'll create a different username called admin2 with a password of Cisco222. So I'll have 2 administrators for my console, and I want the console to use a login database, the local login database. So how do I go about doing it? I'm into the global config mode. In the global config mode, I'll create the user, admin, password is Cisco111. The question didn't ask for an uppercase, so I'm just using the normal case, admin2. Password was Cisco222. Enter. So I have 2 users now, admin1 and admin2. Although I've created this database with 2 users, the console is still going to use the password to log in. Let me show you that. When I exit, I come in, it's still prompting me for that password, which was Cisco123, and I'm in. All right. So it didn't prompt me for the username password. Went back into global config. Now I'm going to configure my console line. Okay. In the console line, I'm going to say login local. Local is pointing to that local database. Now it's no longer going to use the password. Although if you check my running config, I'll do show run. And if I scroll down to the running config, this is the configuration file. You'll see under the line con 0, I have a password, but this is useless now because when I say login local, it's going to ignore the password and do the authentication based on the local database that has admin1 and admin2 with the corresponding users. These are the 2 banners that I had created. Banner MOTD, that's the one that gets prompted prior to the login, and the second banner that was typed in or gets shown after the user successfully logs in. But now because I have login local over here, it's going to prompt me for a username and password. Now if you don't have a username and password, it's going to prompt you for a username. You won't be able to type in. You type in any username, it's not going to be valid because the username does not exist. You lock yourself out of the console. So be careful before you do login local. Have a username password created on the router. The only way to get around that at that point would be shut the router, bring it back up. Hopefully you haven't saved the config. So let's try this now. Now when I log in, because of the login local now, when I press enter, it's going to prompt me for a username. And you'll also notice that the initial message that was the MOTD message is popped in. I'll type in the username as admin1 with a password of what was it? Cisco 111, I believe. There you go. And I'm logged in. Or if I wanted to, I could log in as admin2 Cisco 222. Either way, I've logged in. So now I can identify the user if I have done my logging in terms of keeping track of who's logging in. I can actually now check who logged in at what time, who configured what command, because I uniquely identify admin1 versus admin2. And that's what the objective of this thing over here was, to set the login local. Now the password is still there, but the password is useless now. If you want, it's a good idea just to disable the password. So I can do that over here. I can type in enable global config, go back into the line con0, which is console 0, and say no password. So that way you don't have an unnecessary password in your configuration. You can do show run, and towards the end of the line, the running config is a line configuration, which just says login local. I'll also explain this login synchronous, which is not there by default, but it is. I think I tapped it in one of my initial labs, so that's why it's there. Login local would be the only command over there at this point. Okay, so with that we have checked how to create the local database and use the local database for authentication. Now the next thing that I'm going to talk about over here is to protect the second level authentication. That is, once the user gets into that limited verification mode, which is the exec mode. Let's say you want certain users just to get into this level, the user exec level. I don't want the user to proceed to the next level, which is the privilege exec mode. Privilege exec mode gives you access to all the verification commands and then also allows you to jump into the config mode. So I want to protect my privilege exec as well. So I will allow limited access to certain users, the assistant users, to be able to just get into the user exec mode and do limited verification commands. Then I'll put a password over here that allows me the ability to control which users are allowed to get into what? Privilege exec mode. This is known as the enable password because this is the one that allows you the ability to control who can issue the enable command to get into the privilege exec mode. So the enable password is the next thing that I want to take a look at to control or limit who can get into the privilege exec mode. And that's what the next lab over here is all about. Let's take a look at it. First thing, what the enable password is. Once the user logs into the router, he gets put into the user exec mode where you have limited access to the controls, to the commands, limited verification commands. Now, if you want to control who can get into the enable mode, you can also set an enable secret password. By default, there is no enable secret password, so that's why when you type in enable, it automatically puts you into the privilege exec mode. So now you can do that. Now, the other thing that is very important to understand, and that will come up later on, when I set up remote management of the device through what? Through Telnet and SSH, I will be required to set up this password. If I don't have this password, the enable password, Telnet SSH does not let you go beyond the user exec mode. So for remote access, which is done through Telnet or SSH, it is required that your device, your router, has an enable password set up. If it does not have an enable password set up, it doesn't let the user proceed remotely. All right, that's what this is all about. So how do I configure this enable password? Different ways to do it. In the older days, there used to be a command called the enable password command. It's still there. Cisco 111, just a password. It does work, but the problem with this password is when you do a show run, it will show you the password in clear text. So if somebody is looking at your running config, has access to your running config, maybe you've saved it somewhere, backed it up, they get access to the backup, they know what the password is because the password is stored in the running config in the clear. You can do that, or rather than doing this, I can negate a command by typing in no in front of the command. That gets rid of the command. All right, so rather than doing enable password, nowadays nobody does that. Everybody does this variant of the command called enable secret. It basically does the same thing. What is the password that the lab wants to do? I'll just set that up. CCNA123 is what they want you to do. So I'll just set that password, CCNA123. So when you do the enable secret password, this is also for the enable mode. The difference is when I do show run to check my running config, this password is displayed in an encrypted manner, a hashed manner. So if somebody is looking at the running config, they will not be able to see what the password is. Okay, so let's say you have backed up your running config, your startup config to a server that holds all the backups, and somebody gets access to it, they will now know all your passwords. So by doing the enable secret, the password is hidden in that running config or the startup config. All right, so now I have that password. Let's see how it works. If I exit over here and I log in, username is admin1, password was Cisco111, enter, I get it put into the user exec mode. Now before, when I typed in enable or en, it just put me into privilege exec mode, but now it's going to prompt me for a password that is a password to protect who can get into your privilege exec mode from the user exec mode. That's the middle level that it also creates. So that password over here was CCNA123. So once I tap that password in, I get verified, I get put into the privilege exec mode. This is a required password if I'm remotely accessing my device. Every device that is remotely accessed for Cisco requires, not every device, but every router or switch requires you to have an enable password set up. So now I'm controlling access not only to my console port, but also to my, my privilege exec mode. So there's two levels of passwords. One is to get into the console, which is your console password, which could be essentially replaced by what? A username password combination. Once I'm done with that, the place that I get put into is the user exec mode. So the user comes in, he gets prompted for either the console or the username password, gets into the user exec mode. If I want to control it further, I can put another password which is known as the enable password, or the way that you configure it is using the enable secret command. And that controls access to what? The privilege exec mode. This is a very essential password, very important password, because this is something that is required for remote access. Required means if you don't have it, remotely you won't get access to it, to privilege exec. So that's what this particular lab was all about. Some other console commands that I'm going to be testing in this particular lab, I'm going to be testing 4 other commands over here. Number 1, disabling the domain lookup. If you guys remember, I typed in a wrong command in my user exec mode. It thought it was a host name. It tried to resolve it against my DNS server. If you're mistyping a command, it does that on a regular basis. So it causes you to wait until that lookup comes back and says, hey, this host name cannot be found. To save yourself that hassle, you have the ability to disable the domain lookup command. Let's take a look at it. So if I'm in exit out, I log in, I'm in, and I type in, let's say I was going to do something and I type in a wrong command. And what did it do over here? It basically tried to see if CCC was a host name against the domain server, which is your DNS server. So it's going to try to see if CCC is a host name that I'm trying to log into or connect into. So if I don't want that to happen because I mistyped a name, that's where the no IP domain lookup command comes in. So very important, useful command. Otherwise, what happens is anytime you mistype in a command, it's going to try to resolve it as if it's a host name. So I'll type in enable, password was CCNA123. I'm over here. To do this command, to disable this domain lookup, is no IP domain lookup. So if it's a mistyped command, it's not going to look it up. So let's try it again. Disable. So I'm in here. I type in CCC. Immediately it says, hey, listen, I don't know if this is a host name or a computer name, but I'm not going to do the lookup. So I did not try to translate it and find it on the DNS server. So that's one of the first things that I would always do as soon as I come into the router. So that's the no IP domain lookup. The other thing that I would do is the banner login. This is the message that pops in right after the MOTD banner, but before the user logs in. So maybe this is like MOTD is a message of the day, so it can change on a regular basis. Banner login would be something that is fixed, which is there for a longer period of time. So for example, in my lab over here, I want to say authorized users of KB School are allowed to log in. So this is my banner. How do I set it? Very similar to the way I set my banner for the exec or the MOTD. I do it from the global config again, en, to get into privilege exec, and from there I'll jump into global config. The command is banner, banner login, and you put a delimiting character. Whatever you start with is the one you will end with. So press enter. I'll tell you type in the message. I'll paste the message. Only authorized users of KB School are allowed to log in. And put the same character that you started the message with, and you're done. So let's take a look at where this message pops in. You remember there's a message already as the message of the day, and there's an exec message. So I'll exit out. I've logged off. Press enter. Actually, take a look. It says this is the MOTD message that was already there. This is the login message. But you'll notice the exec message is not there yet until he successfully logs in. So admin1, Cisco 111. I mistyped it, so I'll ask me for it again. There you go, and then that exec message pops in. So another thing that I would do as a login message, this would be more of a standard message, where this is something that you can change on a regular basis. Both messages are popped in prior to your user logging in, and the exec messages after the user successfully logs in. So we've done that. The third thing that I do is the logging synchronous command. Let me take a look at what that does. Let me show you what it does and what is the workaround against it. So let me go back into this. Now, when I'm in global config mode, let's say I've done some configuration, I changed the host name, and now I'm done with it. I want to exit. And once I exit, I want to do the show run command to see if the command that I just saved is there. So take a look at the sequence. What I'm going to do is I'm going to exit, and as soon as I exit, I will start typing in the show run command. So I'll say exit, show run, and I need to do this first because it's already there, so you won't see the difference. So this is something that is not done by default on the console. So I've taken it out. Notice where my prompt is. If I don't do the logging synchronous, it puts my prompt, my cursor, at the end of this message that popped in, the alert that popped in your screen. So if you're doing something, you're configuring something, and all of a sudden an alert message pops in on your screen, message saying the interface went down or up, or any message that pops in, an alert that pops in on the console, what it does, it pops a message in and moves the cursor to the end of that message. So now I don't know what I typed in, what did I not type in. What logging synchronous does, let me show you now. If I had done the same thing with logging synchronous on, the full command is logging synchronous. When I have this command on, I want you guys to see what happens. When I type in show run, that message popped in. My cursor is not at the end of that message. It gives you a separate line and tells you what you have already typed in, so you don't mess up in terms of your command that you're doing. Otherwise, you would press enter and then type it in again. So it's an annoyance more than anything else. So as a habit, what I do is I always keep that on. So logging sync is another thing that I would generally do. All right, so that's the third command that I would recommend that you guys do on a regular basis. I'll give you a list of what I do as soon as I get into my router. I'll create a small little notepad file. I'll do the config that I do on a blank router. And the last thing is the exec timeout. What is the exec timeout? Exec timeout is if you're not doing something on your console, do you want to keep the console open for somebody else to come in and maybe mess up the router? So that's what the exec timeout does. It allows you the ability to configure a timeout on your console line. So if you're done with your work and you're not doing anything, you forgot to log out, it will log you out after X number of minutes or seconds based on your configuration of inactivity. So basically the idle timeout, again, for the console session. So how do I go about doing it? Again, under the console, because I'm doing it under the console, config T to get you into global config, line console 0, and over here the command is exec timeout, and you specify your minutes. Let's say 3 minutes is what your idle timeout is. Basically means that after 3 minutes of inactivity, it's going to block you out. You can do it in minutes, space, seconds. So depends on, you can say exec timeout 3, that would be 3 minutes. If you want to do 3 minutes and 30 seconds, you can do that as well. So now after 3 minutes of 30 seconds, it will log you out. Now, if you don't want to log out, let's say you're doing a big config and you're moving in and out of the router, you can also say no exec timeout. What no exec timeout does, it basically does not put an idle timeout. So you're logged in, you're logged in. You don't need to re-log in. It doesn't exit out. Recommended, and don't do that in a production environment. You do want your router console to be exited if there was no activity on it, like an idle timeout, which is a good practice to do. So let's take a look at the lab and see what they want you to do. Yeah, 3 minutes is what they wanted to set up. So let's do that over here. Our exec timeout, I'll up arrow, get to my exec timeout and say 3. When you just specify the first number, that means minutes only. If I wanted 30 seconds, hypothetically, 0:30. 0:30 means 0 minutes and 30 seconds. All right, that's how it goes. And that's how I would do it. Now I'll open up Notepad over here and I'll put it into your screen so you guys can see it. All right, this is my Notepad over here. When I come into the router, what are the different commands that I would generally do on the router? As soon as you come into the router, the first thing I would type in, and I'm on the router mode, so my prompt will look like this. The first thing obviously is to do what? Get into your EN, so into your enable mode. Now your prompt will look like this. In here, I can't do too much. I would do config T. All right, move into global config mode. Now your prompt will look like this. Now over here, what you would type in, the first thing is the host name. So I'll say host or host name, either way, and your prompt now will look like this. Because your host name is the first thing that it puts, so I change the host name, it changes the prompt. Config. Now over here, first thing, after changing, the next thing that I do after changing the host name is no IP domain lookup. So that way, if I mistype a command, it doesn't go into that looking mode. The other thing that I would also do in this mode, go into my console line. Actually, before I go into the console line, create a local username password database. Hopefully you guys are following along in terms of the commands, what the commands are doing. Once I create the local database, I can do my banner, MOTD, the pound, and then put the message in, authorized users only, and the pound sign to end it, and maybe do another message for exec as well. Login, once you do MOTD, most of the people right now are using MOTD as your only message rather than putting a login message as well. So exec was once he logs in, please save or write or document is a better word, the changes to the change log. Thanks. So message after he gets into exec mode. So a couple of exec messages over there, and then under my console port, line con 0 or console 0, config, and I'll say line now after you put in line con 0, so it tells you into the line config mode. Over here I'll put in a login local pointing to the local database for login, to the logging synchronous, to your exec timeout, say 3 minutes, and that should pretty much take care of the basic configs that I would do on a router on the console port to get it up and running. So this is an example of that. No IP domain lookup, banner, line con 0, login, synchronous, exec timeout, besides doing the other stuff that I had talked about in terms of the username, password, and login local and all that. All right, so this is how you basically get into the router. Basic configuration commands that you would do on router to secure it. At this time, your router is up and running. Now we can do other stuff with it, actual routing stuff on the router. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let's hope to see you in the next video now.